unforgettable tale starts now. Pack your things and get out. Marcus is moving in tonight. Those were the words my wife, Danielle, spoke to me only 3 days after I buried my mother. She stood in the living room of our Atlanta, Georgia home with her arms folded while my best friend of nearly 20 years, Marcus, leaned against the doorway wearing a smug grin. My suit from the funeral was still hanging over a chair because I hadn't found the strength to put it away. I had lost my mother on Monday. By Thursday, I had lost my wife, my best friend, and the home I thought would always be mine. Danielle didn't even pretend to feel guilty. She simply handed me a trash bag and said, "Here's how it happened. My name is Isaiah Brooks. I grew up on the west side of Atlanta with my mother, Lorraine Brooks. She worked as a registered nurse for more than 30 years, raising me alone after my father died when I was 6. She never complained about double shifts or holidays spent at the hospital. She always told me that character mattered more than money because money could disappear overnight. Character stayed with you forever." I believed every word she said because she lived those lessons every single day. Even when life knocked her down, she found a reason to smile before the sun set. Marcus Johnson and I met during 7th grade after I defended him from a group of boys who kept stealing his lunch. We became inseparable. We played basketball together, graduated from the same high school, attended different colleges, and eventually settled back in Atlanta. He was a brother I never had. My mother treated him like family, inviting him over every Thanksgiving and Christmas. She always prepared an extra plate because she knew Marcus loved her homemade macaroni and cheese. Looking back, I wonder if she ever noticed something about him that I completely missed. I met Danielle Harris at a charity networking event downtown. She was intelligent, confident, and ambitious. She had just started working in commercial real estate while I had accepted a position as a business administrator for a healthcare company. She laughed at my terrible jokes and told me she admired men who stayed close to their mothers. During those first 2 years, everything seemed easy. We encouraged each other's careers, traveled around the Southeast, and dreamed about buying a larger home someday. When I proposed, she cried so hard that strangers applauded in the restaurant. The first year of marriage felt like confirmation that I had made the right choice. My mother welcomed Danielle with open arms, treating her like the daughter she never had. Sunday dinners became a tradition. Marcus attended many of those meals too. We joked that one day our children would grow up together like cousins. I trusted them both completely. Never once did I imagine the two people sitting across from me would eventually become the reason I questioned every decision I had ever made. Small changes appeared so gradually that I ignored them. Danielle began criticizing my career. She compared my salary to entrepreneurs she followed online and insisted I lacked ambition. "You're too comfortable," she would say while scrolling through luxury homes on her phone. Marcus laughed whenever she teased me. At first I thought he was trying to keep the mood light, but over time his comments became sharper. "She's right," he would add. "You play life too safe." Somehow, every conversation ended with me defending myself inside my own home. My mother noticed the shift long before I did. One evening, after Danielle had left the room, Mom quietly asked if everything was all right between us. I smiled and told her marriage was just stressful sometimes. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Don't mistake constant disrespect for ordinary stress," she said gently. "A loving partner corrects you with kindness, not humiliation." I nodded but dismissed her concern. I didn't want to believe the woman I loved could intentionally hurt me. Over the next 2 years, Danielle became increasingly distant. She worked late almost every night. Weekend business trips became common. Marcus also seemed unavailable whenever I called. Sometimes both of them claimed to be attending networking events on the same evenings, though I never connected the dots. Whenever I questioned anything, Danielle accused me of being insecure. "Successful people don't need permission to work," she snapped once. I apologized for asking, convincing myself that trust meant ignoring uncomfortable feelings. Then my mother's health changed without warning. What started as fatigue became a frightening diagnosis. The doctors discovered an aggressive illness that spread faster than anyone expected. I spent nearly every evening at Grady Memorial Hospital after work. Danielle rarely came. Marcus visited once during the first week and then stopped showing up altogether. They both claimed work kept them busy. My mother never complained about their absence. She only asked me to take care of myself because grief often arrived before death did. During those final weeks, my mother shared memories I had never heard before. She talked about my father's determination, about the sacrifices she made to keep food on the table, and about how proud she already was of the man I had become. Success isn't measured by who applauds you, she whispered one afternoon. It's measured by whether you can still sleep peacefully after making difficult choices. At the time, I thought she was preparing me for life without her. I didn't realize she was preparing me for betrayal as well. My mother passed away early on a quiet Monday morning. I was holding her hand when the heart monitor fell silent. The room suddenly felt enormous, as if every wall had moved farther away. I remember thanking every nurse who came in, even though I could barely hear my own voice. Danielle arrived nearly an hour later. She hugged me for only a few seconds before asking whether I had contacted the funeral home. Her tone was practical, almost impatient. Marcus never came to the hospital. He sent a brief text that read, "Sorry for your loss, brother. Call me if you need anything." I stayed at the message for several minutes, wondering why it felt so empty. The funeral was held that Friday at a church on the south side of Atlanta. My mother had spent decades serving the community, so the sanctuary was filled with former patients, neighbors, church members, and co-workers. They spoke about her kindness, her strength, and the way she always found time to encourage people who felt invisible. I listened through tears, wishing I could hear her laugh one more time. Danielle sat beside me without holding my hand. Marcus arrived late, stayed through the service, and left before the family gathered for the meal afterward. At the time, I assumed grief affected everyone differently. The house felt painfully quiet after the funeral. Every room reminded me of my mother. Danielle avoided me, claiming she needed space because sadness was emotionally exhausting. I couldn't believe those words had come from the woman I married. That weekend, I spent hours sorting through my mother's belongings, carefully folding sweaters that still carried her favorite lavender scent. I found birthday cards she had saved from my childhood, school photographs, and handwritten recipes stained with years of use. Those memories became my only comfort while my own wife seemed determined to distance herself from my pain. On the third evening after the funeral, Danielle asked me to sit in the living room because she had something important to discuss. Her voice was unusually calm. Before I could answer, the front door opened with a key I didn't recognize. Marcus walked inside carrying an overnight bag as though he belonged there. My stomach tightened immediately. Danielle didn't look surprised. Instead, she smiled at him in a way I hadn't seen in months. Suddenly, every late meeting, every missed phone call, and every strange excuse came rushing back into my mind all at once. Danielle stood up and took Marcus's hand without saying a word. I remember staring at their fingers locked together because my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Finally, she looked directly at me. "We've been together for over a year," she said. "We were waiting for the right time to tell you." I blinked several times, convinced I had misunderstood her. "Oh yeah," I whispered. That meant they had started their relationship while my mother was still healthy, while we were still celebrating holidays together, while Marcus was still calling me his brother. Marcus shrugged as though we were discussing the weather instead of destroying a lifelong friendship. "People change, Isaiah. Danielle and I make more sense together. You were never going to become the man she needed." There wasn't a trace of shame in his voice. No apology. No hesitation. Just confidence. Danielle nodded in agreement. "You love routine. Marcus dreams bigger." I finally realized I deserve someone who isn't satisfied with an ordinary life. Each sentence landed harder than the last. I had never felt so completely erased by the people I trusted most. Then Danielle delivered the cruelest blow of all. "You need to move out tonight," she said flatly. "The mortgage is in both our names, but my attorney says we'll handle everything during the divorce. Marcus is staying here with me." I looked around the living room we had decorated together, the dining table my mother had helped us choose, and the framed wedding photographs still hanging on the wall. "You're throwing me out 3 days after I buried my mother?" I asked. Danielle crossed her arms. "I'm done pretending. The timing isn't my problem." I searched Marcus's face, hoping to find even a hint of regret. There was none. Just make this easy, he said. Dragging it out won't change anything. I realized then that the friendship I treasured had meant far more to me than it ever had to him. The man who once promised to stand beside me through every stage of life was now standing beside my wife instead. They weren't conflicted. They weren't ashamed. They simply wanted me gone so they could begin the life they had already planned together behind my back. Danielle handed me 2 large trash bags. Take your clothes and whatever personal items you need. Everything else can be sorted out later. I stood there in disbelief. She wasn't asking me to leave for a few days. She was evicting me from my own home while I was still grieving my mother's death. I packed in silence because I understood something important in that moment. Begging people without compassion never restores dignity. It only gives them another opportunity to disrespect you. My heart was breaking, but I refused to let them watch it happen. Just before I walked out the front door, I turned back one last time. Danielle was already discussing furniture with Marcus as if I had ceased to exist. Neither of them looked at me. Neither of them said goodbye. I placed my wedding ring on the hallway table, picked up my bags, and stepped into the cool Atlanta night with nowhere to go. I had buried my mother 3 days earlier. Now I was leaving the only home I had shared with my wife. As I drove away with tears blurring my vision, I honestly believed life had taken everything I had left. I spent my first night in a modest extended-stay hotel on the outskirts of Atlanta. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet, but it was quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, staring at the 2 trash bags that now held what remained of my married life. Every few minutes I reached for my phone, hoping Danielle had sent a message saying she had made a terrible mistake. Nothing came. Marcus didn't call either. 20 years of friendship had ended without a single honest conversation. For the first time since I was a little boy, I felt completely alone. The following morning, I reported to work as though nothing had happened. My coworkers noticed the dark circles under my eyes but respected my silence. I buried myself in spreadsheets, meetings, and reports because focusing on numbers was easier than facing reality. During lunch, I sat alone in my car and cried until I could barely breathe. By the time I returned to the office, I had washed my face and forced another smile. I wasn't trying to appear strong. I simply didn't have the energy to explain how 1 week had destroyed nearly every relationship that mattered to me. Over the next several weeks, the divorce process moved forward with startling speed. Danielle communicated only through her attorney. Every message was cold, direct, and focused on dividing property. There wasn't a single sentence acknowledging my grief or the years we had shared. Marcus never contacted me. Mutual friends slowly stopped inviting me to gatherings after Danielle and Marcus began attending together as a couple. Some people believed the version of events they told. Others stayed silent to avoid choosing sides. I learned that loneliness often grows louder after betrayal than during it. One Saturday afternoon, I returned to my mother's house to finish organizing her belongings. Every room carried memories that made my chest tighten. Inside her bedroom closet, tucked beneath a stack of neatly folded blankets, I discovered a sealed envelope with my name written in her careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first sentence stopped me cold. Isaiah, if you're reading this, life has probably become much harder than either of us hoped. Tears filled my eyes before I reached the second line. My mother wrote that she had noticed changes in Danielle long before I admitted anything was wrong. She never accused her directly, but she encouraged me not to measure my worth by another person's loyalty. She reminded me that storms reveal foundations, not create them. Near the end of the letter, she mentioned something I knew nothing about. Years earlier, she had invested carefully and consistently, refusing to spend money on luxuries. She had arranged for everything to pass to me quietly after her death. Use it to build a peaceful life, she wrote, not to prove anything to anyone. A week later, I met with the attorney handling my mother's estate. He explained that she had left me a fully paid-off investment account along with the proceeds from selling a small parcel of land she had inherited decades earlier. It wasn't enough to make me wealthy overnight, but it was enough to erase every debt I carried and give me the freedom to start over somewhere new. As I left the attorney's office, I realized my mother had given me one final gift, the chance to rebuild without depending on anyone who had abandoned me. I accepted a promotion with my company that required relocating to Charlotte, North Carolina. It wasn't glamorous, but it offered a fresh beginning. I rented a small apartment overlooking a quiet park and kept my life intentionally simple. My mornings began with long walks before work. Evenings were spent reading, cooking, or learning about long-term investing. I stopped wondering whether Danielle regretted her choices because every minute spent thinking about her was a minute stolen from my own future. Healing didn't happen all at once, but it happened one ordinary day at a time. Instead of chasing quick success, I followed the discipline my mother had lived by. I invested part of my inheritance conservatively, continued advancing in my career, and lived well below my means. I earned professional certifications that made me more valuable to my employer. Within 3 years, I was promoted again, this time into a senior administrative leadership role overseeing multiple regional operations. My salary increased steadily, but very few people knew how much progress I had made because I rarely discussed money. Peace had become more valuable to me than recognition. Every now and then I heard small pieces of news about Danielle and Marcus through old acquaintances. They had launched a real estate investment company together and filled social media with expensive vacations, designer clothes, and motivational captions about winning. I never responded when people sent me screenshots. Pictures can hide a great deal. I had spent enough years comparing my quiet life to someone else's carefully edited image. My mother's words echoed in my mind. Character stays with you forever. I chose to believe that truth instead of chasing appearances. 5 years passed faster than I expected. By then I had purchased a comfortable home in a peaceful Charlotte neighborhood, paid for entirely through careful saving and disciplined investing. There were no luxury cars in the driveway and no extravagant parties inside. Instead, there were shelves filled with books, framed photographs of my mother, and a small garden she would have loved. Some evenings I sat on the back porch watching the sunset, realizing something I hadn't understood during those painful days in Atlanta. Happiness often returns quietly, long before you notice it has come back. Before you go, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in this situation? And if you love emotional stories filled with shocking twists, betrayal, and satisfying karma, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a new story from Emma Details. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next tale.